All right. Well, today on the show, we are so excited to have Damian Gerke with us today. Damian, how are you?
I'm doing great, Mark. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm really excited to dive into our interview here. So, Damian, you're on here today to talk about your book, In the Way. Church as We Know It Can Be a Discipleship Movement Again. And man, I would love to just dive right in. And the book just gives such a radical vision when we compare the church as we know it. We'll use that phrase a lot in this interview, church as we know it. Just
Yeah.
a radical vision of the church today. I would love to hear, what were you seeing in the church, kind of as you landscaped the church? What were you seeing that led you to write the book?
Yeah. Well, if I can, I'll tell it in the context of my story.
Go
If I
ahead.
can be,
Yeah.
I'll try to do a quick version of it. There's one that we could be here all night long, but um, when I first got out of college, I was an engineer. I was in the aerospace industry. Actually came to know the Lord during that time in my life. So I've always had this kind of systems approach to looking at things. And then got into ministry, was a pastor in a number of different churches for about 15 years. And toward the end of that time period, I was just looking at church and just looking at all of the effort that was going into it, the amount of resources, time, money, service, everything, and just started being troubled by a couple of things. One, I was still coming to know the Lord in a young adult stage. My life was still being transformed. My transformation was pretty radical from my perspective. And I just wasn't seeing a similar transformation in a lot of people's lives. There was some good things happening, lots of faithful people, um, lots of good effort, good intentions, and some things changed. We saw some lives change, some marriages healed, and people come to know the Lord, and that was great. But for the amount of resources going into it, I was just troubled that I didn't see the kind of life change and really a depth in relationship with God. And so I started thinking it was sort of a spiritual formation issue, that we just needed to help people have a deeper relationship with God. But it turned out that wasn't really it, and I didn't honestly know. It was a real journey for me and my wife, because we honestly didn't know how to even talk about it. There was nobody else really talking about what we were seeing, and there was just this sort of what a lot of people now have come to call like a holy dissatisfaction, just like an urging that there's more, that there's some more or there's less. It wasn't sure at the time, which one it was, but there was just a different place that we were supposed to be. And at the time, I couldn't really project that on anyone else. So, and I say all this, by the way, and I hope I communicate this in the book, that I have lots of respect for the church. I mean, no disrespect. I want to see the local church flourish, believe in it wholeheartedly, and fully support people that are in ministry, giving their lives to ministry. I know, I've been there. I know what that's like. So I fully support them. So this is not criticism. It's just a sense that we are not where we're supposed to be. And I didn't know where that was, so I didn't know how to talk about it. So we ended up transitioning out of active pastoral ministry, still was doing ministry on the side, and had gotten into coaching, got trained in coaching, and so started doing coaching and consulting. And then the Lord led us through this journey where we got connected with a retired missionary out of who had served in Guatemala, and had done this approach in his ministry called Disciple Making Movement, DMM. And trained in that. He mentored us, and we started hacking away at it, trying it, and really became convinced that this is what I realized was missing in the church. So we continued to pursue that, and got connected with a guy here in Tampa Had no idea there was anyone else really in the United States that was doing it. But lo and behold, there was a guy in Tampa named Lee Wood, and he had started an called One Body Ministries. And he had been trained by a man named Curtis Sargent, who was one of the foremost experts in the world, really, on disciple making movement. It's an approach to church that was really born out of a lot of in South Asia, China, Indonesia, and had begun in recent years in India, that had seen millions of people come to faith. And it's a very decentralized approach to doing ministry, and it's really spirit-led. It's really what was evident in the New Testament. And when you look at how the New Testament church formed from the small and that were following across the Roman Empire. So as missionaries and missions leaders began to study this and compare notes, they realized there was a pattern of doing this type of ministry that could be reproduced in other areas, other cultures. And now there's active movements on every continent, in the United States included. So have been an elder with One Body Church. We transitioned it from One Body Ministries to One Body Church back in 2016, and so we are one of the churches that's in America that's designated and dedicated to doing disciple-based, multiplication-based ministry. So we don't have a building. We have church in homes and businesses and coffee houses and under trees out in the park, wherever people gather, really. And it's focused on making disciples and equipping them to make disciples that will make more disciples with a multiplicative outcome.
And so in the book, you've already used the phrase, DMM. You've already talked about disciple making movements. In the book, you use that phrase and the other phrase, church as we know it, repeatedly. So I would love for you just to give our audience, people who are watching, listening, just a frame of reference, just to help us wrap our minds around what you're talking about. Can you talk about what those two things are, and maybe what's the difference between them, church as we know it and disciple making movements?
Sure. That's really, it's the whole book to explain that. In particular, I highlight 25 specific contrasts that I think are important to understand. But just to start off at a high level, what I would say is church as we know it in the West in particular, and this is true of the same model of church around the world, but church in the West in particular came out of the Reformation. So it was, again, if you can bear with me I'm making some general statements here, but it largely, the form structure of church as we understand it came out of Roman Catholicism, and we repurposed many of those forms to be theologically appropriate to the Reformation movement. But a lot of the forms and structures and processes are at very best analogous, and in many cases almost identical. And so that involves and then after that, once the Reformation happened, the church quickly began splintering into denominations, and to the point that we have 300 plus denominations just in the United States alone. So all of this was born out of a time where rebellion was the norm. So to look at the Catholic Church and say the abuses, and they were very abuses, to separate from those and correct what we see as wrong. And so this was all born out of a time where the Renaissance was in full flux, in full bloom, and with that you created this hierarchical organization that was really, frankly, associated socially um, with the government and with the societal structures in place. All that changed in the world when people came over to the United States, where there was no structure and no government oversight, but you still had this hierarchical, typically a hierarchical structure with a senior pastor or a senior leader at the top, everyone underneath that authority. Its identification was around whatever tradition or denomination, and it saw itself as a unique entity that was distinct from the other churches that were also unique entities. And in a sense, unfortunately, sort of put individual church congregations in competition with one another. So it also became highly oriented toward teaching. So proclamation, exegetical teaching became the centerpiece of the congregational life in the United States and in Europe as well, but particularly in the United States, we see with the movements toward evangelism and the expressions of personal faith. We saw the rise of evangelism in the church, where evangelism essentially became the mission of the church, not disciple making. So you get these patterns of organizations in a fixed location, typically in a building or underneath a what in many cases becomes a celebrity or high profile leader, and everyone sees themselves as adherents of that leader or of that particular tradition of church. So you contrast that with a disciple making movement where every individual believer is equipped and authorized to be essentially the body of Christ, to be Jesus, and has the authority to go and make disciples. And it becomes a very decentralized process where there's not a particular leader at the top or a group of leaders at the top. You see apostles and prophets equipping people, the gospel spread wherever relationship lines happen to take them. And under persecution in the New Testament, for instance, that meant the gospel was spread wherever people went. And so it spread quickly across the Roman Empire and sort of then percolated up society, if you will. But it's a decentralized network where people are connected, where authority is dispersed and released, and where oversight happens in terms of leadership and authority. Oversight happens as along relationship lines and relationship connections.
Yeah, and so just as I'm listening to you,
Yeah.
one of the things that comes to my mind is somebody that is watching this or listening to this that's a pastor or a leader or just a part of the model of church as we know it.
Yeah.
And they might say, well, Damian, in my church, people are equipped to be disciple makers. In my church, people are, they're released to do these things. But correct me if I'm wrong here. So what you are really trying to bring out is, even in just the way that church as we know it is structured, we are almost discipling people into being dependent on pastors, teachers, leaders, going to a location rather than being missionaries in the culture. And so the structure itself can actually hijack the mission.
That's exactly it. It's an all, yeah, I know. So don't know a pastor, I'll put it that way. I don't know a pastor who would say they didn't believe in the priesthood of the believer, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that was even a tenet of the Reformation. Yet what I would say is it's the structure of the church prohibits that, or to borrow to plug the title of the book, it gets in the way unintentionally, I think. It's in the way. The structure is set up where, if you think about it, there's an authorized leader up on stage doing the teaching. So everyone else comes and listens or partakes of that. And I don't mean this in a negative way, but sort of consumes that. If you think about the control, the process of the local church in terms of how ministry happens, it happens in a controlled environment where only authorized people are able to do it, and those authorized people have to be vetted. They have to have a certain level of biblical understanding or doctrinal understanding. Everyone participates in a programmed sort of approach where teaching is the primary mechanism in the whole thing. And then contrast that with the DMM approach is where disciple making. By the way, a disciple is in a, let me back up a second. A disciple in churches we know it, typically people would say, well, that's somebody who has given their life to Christ, and the process of making a disciple is to bring them to maturity. So teach them more scripts, teach them more doctrine, and help them, live a life that exhibits Christian maturity. What I would say is discipleship to me is a process where you take someone who's seeking the Lord and you equip them to the point where they are able to equip someone else to be a disciple. Mm. So discipleship, if you will, is not a maturing process. It is an equipping, training process to where the fruit is not a mature believer. The fruit is an equipped believer who can turn around and train someone else in what they've been trained in. And so a lot of the structures of church as we know it, really, they're really oriented toward the first definition of a disciple, toward a knowledge base, primarily knowledge base, but also, life as well, but Christian maturity instead of the training and equipping.
Yeah. I think that one of the things that really brings me in, I'm a pastor of the church that I pastor would absolutely be, just characteristic, the church as we know it. And, that's the model that I got saved in, trained in, and that sort of thing. I think that one of the things that really draws me in here, especially into your book, is the past 2 years, COVID, and just things like that, the way that they've been, so many things have been revealed. And I think one of the things that I've clearly seen is just the inadequacy of 1 hour on Sunday to sufficiently disciple people.
Yeah.
But we have put all of our eggs in that basket.
Yeah, exactly. And it's the way I say it is it's revealed our just how much we've depended on that structure.
Yes. Yeah.
So if that element, if that approach to ministry is, if your approach to ministry and making disciples is so dependent on, and almost universally so, is so dependent on getting people in a room at the same time to teach them or to engage with them, then something wrong. Because most of the rest of the world simply doesn't have that. And I say this just in the sense of, I don't mean to sound the sky is falling here, but just, it's not, I'll say this, it's not beyond the realm of conception to envision a scenario in the United States in which churches can no longer have 501c3 status, where they have to pay property taxes on the property and physical plant that they own. And we'll just stop there. There could be more.
Yeah.
Well, I'll add one more. So let's say, because of the sensitivity to gender identification, that any church that upholds biblical principles of marriage and sex identity, suddenly there's a law against that, and the leader of that organization is going to be imprisoned, right?
Mhm.
So just take those three scenarios. It's not beyond the realm of conception
Yeah.
to realize that what would happen to church as we know it if those three things happen.
Mm.
So we know the gospel is sufficient. We know the truth is there. There, all throughout human history, the church has had to deal with situations like these, and some even much more severe than that. And the church has flourished in those scenarios,
Mm.
in those situations. We have churches that the church in Afghanistan right now, it's small, but we all know the situation in Afghanistan. It's growing very fast. The church in Iran is growing very fast. There's a thriving underground church all throughout the Middle East.
Yeah.
And thankfully they're they're somewhat invisible, because their life would be in jeopardy, and their life is in jeopardy, but it's growing and flourishing. But the church in America, if that happened to us, I what would the church look like,
Mm.
right? What would we do? How would we pivot as a church leader? What would you do with your people?
Yeah.
You'd probably start meeting with them one-on-one. You'd identify, okay, who are my most equipped, trained disciples, people that are most equipped to begin equipping somebody else, right?
Mm.
So my question is, why don't we do that?
Yeah.
And I love the idea of getting together. It's wonderful, but why be so dependent on that programmatic structure to do what doesn't require a building necessarily? It doesn't require a congregational meeting where everybody comes together.
Yeah. So I would love to. So I think what you just now said sets up a good transition to make this really practical. And so I know one of the things
Okay.
that I just tried to do as I was reading your book is okay, what does this look like? You know, what would
Yeah.
what would this look like? So you're a part of a DMM, a disciple making movement. You're a part of one. Could you just go into some detail, give us a picture of what's your normal routines and practices? Say what's a week look like, so like in the typical
Sure.
model, the week is, well, Sunday's coming, and then we've got small groups, and then you've got some other things. That's not hard to imagine.
Right.
That's pretty much what we're familiar with. So give us a picture of what just rhythms you guys have as a DMM and what a week looks like or things like that.
Sure. So the way we say it is everybody has a home church, meaning that's my home church. It's not a church that meets in a home. So another way we talk about that is we describe it as your primary spiritual family. So this could be most of the, and it's not a house church. It's it's recognizing that church is the people, not the place or the building or the program. So the people gather together weekly. We have our home churches spread throughout. They meet all different times of the week. Most of them do happen to meet on Sundays. So I'll just describe my home church. We meet Sunday afternoons. We come together. Sometimes we have a meal, sometimes we don't. And we meet for 2 to 3 hours. We have a time of worship. We have a time of prayer. Most of our churches, just the structure that we use, we call it a 3/3 format. It's broken down into 3 specific segments. The first segment is where we check in on how things went during the week, have some worship time, have some prayer. How's everybody doing? What are any prayer needs or or emotional needs or whatever. It's sort of a check-in kind of time. Then our second third is look up. That's where we look at the scriptures and we have a discussion, a structured but very flexible discussion around the scriptures, asking the Lord to reveal to us what we should do. And then our third is what we call look forward. That's where we ask the Lord to give us direction on how we can put what he showed us into practice this coming week. And then we have some accountability around that. We actually write down, we journal what the Lord showed each person. We take a picture of it, send it out so everybody has it. They're praying and supporting one another throughout the week. So that happens weekly. We also have an approach that the way we talk about it is have a home church and then be discipling someone else so that they can start their home church. So we call that modeling and assisting. So on Sundays, Sunday mornings, before our home church, we have another lady that is leading a home church and discipling people. So we go down and help her. So we participate in that, and we'll do that until she is fully equipped to run and lead that home church on her own. And then once that happens, we'll begin to look for someone else to disciple. And that's how the multiplication happens. We have a home church that we're a part of, and we have a disciple making relationship that we're helping someone else start their home church. So it's being a part of two churches. That's a regular rhythm that we encourage every single believer to pursue. Then we have a gathering once a month. Usually it's the first Saturday of each month, where we come together for report, for fellowship, for worship. Usually there's a meal, we have communion. It's a time where if anyone has showed any interest in participating in a DMM church, they can come to this large gathering and just get relationship connection and get a feel for what happens. That's a typical rhythm in our church.
And so all of those groups, and you said they're not house churches. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah.
They meet in homes, they meet in houses, but they're house churches.
Okay.
So one of the things that at the beginning, we encourage people to go start their own home church or house church. Mm-hmm. And it became pretty clear that people were more oriented around the event of a house church rather than making disciples. So what we did, we changed it to go make a disciple and help them start a home church. Because if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. You can start a house church but not make disciples. Yeah. But if you go make disciples, you're going to get a house church out of it because of the nature of what making a disciple is. Yeah.
And so those groups, the disciple groups, they come together once a month. And so that is a time. Is there somebody teaching at that? Is it, all those groups? What's that kind of look like?
Yeah, it varies. It's really one of the things that is really most important that we try to stress is disciple making is a relational dynamic. I mean, it's a relational process. So it's really more about the relationships than what we do. So having said that, there are some scriptural imperatives that I think it's important for the church to partake in. So we do have some teaching, we have worship, we have testimonies, we have reports of what the Lord is doing. We also have service opportunities. So we have a communication network that we utilize. We utilize the app Signal, the Signal app, as well as some email distributions. And so any prayer requests that come up, any service opportunities, we're always looking for ways to serve. We're prayer walking in different neighborhoods or areas of the church. We're constantly looking to see, where's the Lord leading? Where's the gospel not, so that we can go there and make disciples? And so we're communicating a lot through those channels just to keep everybody up to speed on what's happening. If there's a specific ministry need. Oh, and another thing, like I should mention, each of the home churches is autonomous in the sense of, this is an example of what they do with their money. So because we don't have a building, our overhead costs are pretty much nil. So it's very lean in terms of budget, and we teach that everyone is responsible to the Lord about how they should spend their money. So we encourage biblical giving, that the Lord does everything that you have with a mindset to the Lord. Let the Lord guide you as to how you can use your money for kingdom purpose. So each church has a fund that they give to, so that when a ministry need, or a wife who was getting out of a very very nasty divorce, very nasty marriage, abusive. We've helped to fund her legal expenses, as well as just living expenses. We have another single mom that she she lost her job, she wrecked her car all in the same week, and got kicked out of her house. And so she just, her life was just and so our church was able to say, hey, let's take the money that we've been collecting and apply it toward this single mom. And that just happens through relationships. They didn't have to bubble it up and get permission and all of that. It's their money that they had set apart. And so so ministry service like that happens very quickly. So that's another aspect of just the life of the church, is constantly looking around, very mindful of Matthew 25, the end of Matthew 25, where Jesus says, when I was sick, you gave me food. When I was homeless, you gave me shelter. That's God has a heart for the fatherless, the homeless, the widows, the people that are hurting. And the church has an incredible responsibility and opportunity to make disciples through serving our community. So that's another big part of the life of the church.
That's really helpful. That's really helpful to get a picture of it. So one of the things that I thought was also very clarifying in the book is you give some different examples of how this structure might look. So there's the startup model where you can just start right out of the gate, something like this. I was really interested in what you call the parallel strategy. And so you gave an example of a church that had a lot of the look of churches we know it. And then they built in disciple making movement principles, practices. What are some of the things that church in particular, and you can even say their name, I don't have it in front of me, I don't recall it off the top of my head, but what are some things that they're doing that would cause them to stand out? You would look at it and say, oh wow, look at this, they're really trying to do something different here.
Yeah, it's a Shoal Creek Community Church in Kansas City.
Okay.
And there's others. Restoration Church in Denver is another one. Revolve Church in Cape May, New Jersey is another one. Each one is going to look a little different, just because each congregation, each church is different. The leadership is different. The people are different. The way they've practiced ministry is different. So each one sort of has its own look and feel and vibe, so to speak. But the general practice is you continue your church as we know it, your tradition, and I call it legacy. It's another term I use for it. We use for it your existing legacy structures and ministries, and then you begin a parallel. And I think of like two rails on a train track, right? They don't ever meet. but they're both viable. And in terms of ministry leadership, you support both of them. So you maintain your legacy approach, and then you start a DMM alongside the legacy, and the two really don't meet. So the idea here is that most of the people you're going to reach in the DMM approach, outside of the footprint of your church's ministries, they're probably not going to come to church anyway. So you go out as believers, present the gospel, making disciples with, under the banner of Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior, and you equip them to go and make other disciples. So that effort, the DMM effort, continues to go out. It continues to expand into wherever it happens to go. It goes within that cultural group or with that relational group, and you don't build in an expectation of these people should come to the existing church ministry. And by the same token, people that are used to or comfortable with coming to a church, we want to maintain that. We don't want to distract them or disrupt them. We want that to continue to grow and flourish. But in terms of what the church does, they're both viable and they're both active. I really lean on Luke's version of the wine and the wineskin parable, where Jesus says, you don't put new wine into an old wineskin because you'll lose the wineskin and the wine, like both, it'll burst, can't contain it. And then he says in Luke's version, he says something that I think is really important that I think often miss. He says the people that have drank the old wine, they prefer it. They won't drink the new wine because they're used to the old. And so I think that's a way to give honor and esteem to the church, and yet also be entrepreneurial and innovative, and recognize that God wants us to grow beyond our current footprint. God is doing things out in the community, in businesses, in areas of need in the community that really our church can't go there and adapt and meet those needs.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Oh, it makes total sense. Yeah, that makes total sense. Yeah. And so in the contrast that you give in the book between Churches We Know It and DMM, you talk about shepherds and teachers, that we typically were familiar with, shepherds and teachers. But then you talk about that versus what you call APEST, or some people might be familiar with the fivefold ministry, Ephesians 4, apostles, prophets, evangelists, shepherds, teachers. And I just think one of the sorely missed things that we need to talk about and lean into in the church is spiritual gifts, callings that God's given us. I would love for you to could you unpack, maybe just quickly, however you want to, what those 5 gifts are, and then how can leaders find those kind of giftings in their congregations?
Yeah, great question. So this is the way I would say it, and let me frame that conversation with a couple of things that I think are important. Ephesians 4, the 5 gifts you mentioned, apostles, prophets, evangelists, shepherds, teachers. In my view, these are equipping gifts, right? It says Christ gave these gifts for the purpose of building up the body of Christ, right? Until it reaches maturity and looks like Jesus. That's a very rough paraphrase, but so I see those as leadership expressions, where people are going to be gifted in different ways. So some people are their primary expression of their leadership is going to be with the voice of an apostle. Another person is going to have their primary expression of their gift is one of teaching. Another one is going to be their primary expression is one of shepherding, care, nurture, security, connection, right? That's all shepherding. Evangelists is pretty clear. They're able to um, share the gospel in an effective way, in a compelling, effective way, where people are moved to trust Jesus, right? Prophets. This one is probably the most misunderstood, but the way I see the prophetic gift is it tends to move the church toward purity. They tend to bring up issues. They tend to be sort of black and white, not and saying that in a negative way, but they see certain things with a high degree of clarity, and are uncompromising maybe in what they feel is very strong. So there's also in that mix a mutual submission that I think is necessary. In churches we know it, I think the typical the structures of the church have primarily been oriented around shepherds and teachers. And so the apostles, prophets, and evangelists are a little bit excluded. Apostles tend to be, they're very entrepreneurial. They get bored very easily. They're always looking for the next thing. They don't particularly like structure. So the apostles, the people that are in your church that are kind of pushing your button, or saying, when are we going to get this done, or when are we going to get that done, or why can't we just, can we just like go? Why do we have to stay? Can we not just go? Can we go do something? Those are probably your apostles, and they're probably the frustrated ones. But they're very entrepreneurial, and they see opportunity when most everybody else doesn't. Prophets are the ones, like I said, that are always calling us to purity, to take a stand on a particular issue. Evangelists, pretty straightforward. Shepherds and teachers, they're probably all over the place. They're your small group leaders. They're your Sunday school teachers. They're your children's ministry, workers. They're, I think shepherds and teachers are the most, in terms of a breakdown, like percentage wise. I don't have the data, to support this. This is mostly anecdotal, but I think shepherds and teachers are the predominant, in terms of size, predominant leadership.
Yeah.
So in starting a DMM, you really want to begin with apostles. I think we see in the New Testament, there's a pretty clear indication of apostles and prophets create the foundation that then evangelists, shepherds, and teachers build upon. Paul primarily uses this language pretty frequently, but you see it in Acts. You see it in the early formation of the church. The apostles were the ones that went out and started things. Paul and Barnabas, in particular, they started the church, and then you see other people coming in behind and beginning to add structure and consistency and quality and normalcy and patterns and rhythms and things like that.
Yeah.
But they have to work in concert. Like one gift can't take precedence over the other in terms of priority, or the church is somewhat dysfunctional.
Yeah. Damian, this has been so helpful. I feel like I have a million questions, and so, but I want to honor your time. But I will close. I will close with this. I know that you've got the audience here of church leaders, people that serve in churches in various capacities, or they're just a part of a church, things like that. What would you say to the person? What would you say to the person that as you're talking, they just have a sense that God wants them to pursue this? Other than get the book. We want them to get the book. and we'll link to that in the show notes. But what would you say to that person?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, to everybody, this is not a divisive conversation.
Yeah.
This is an opportunity. This is not pitting one expression of church over the other. Nothing like that. This is an opportunity for the church to take a stride forward and to to serve and see people come to faith in ways that we've never seen before, at rates we've never seen before. So let's make it a positive conversation. And that's what I would say first to everyone. To someone, if they really are, if something about DMM is really piqued their interest or sort of begun to scratch that itch that they couldn't quite get at, the keep reading, like keep investigating. We would love to talk with you. There's people all across the United States that are doing this, and they're all in different places, but it's really just a process of beginning. The worst thing you could do is try to understand it all before you begin to walk it out. If God is creating curiosity, I would say begin exploring that. Just at our church, for instance, we have what we call an orientation every 6 weeks. If you want to go to our website, we're actually in the process of relaunching it. Hopefully by the time this goes live, it'll be up, but you'll be able to register and attend. It's like a 3-day opportunity to come in and see what disciple making looks like. And there's a 1 day is devoted to training and understanding the principles. But this is all about just establishing relationship and beginning to, it's a faith journey. So it's just beginning to take the steps, and God will reveal what he is destined for you, where he's leading you. He will reveal it. But like anything, any faith journey, you have to actually take the steps to begin to see it.
Yeah, that's good. So Damian, I know that before we started to record, you mentioned you've actually got a website, some resources online, and why don't you go ahead and share that with our listeners?
Yeah. Thank you. So our website, our church's website is onebody.church. It's the number one, BODY.church. There's also a site called loveoneanother.life. And this is a site that will help you get connected to DMM practitioners all across North America, United States and Canada. And there's also a documentary that you can watch for free on that site. It's called Love One Another Until the Whole World Knows. It's a 92-minute documentary, and it tells part of the story of One Body Church as well as a couple of other churches. But it's mainly, it shows you a number of different people that are going through this journey, and there are different places on the journey of becoming a disciple maker, and just what it looks like, what it feels like, what they're thinking, what their questions they have, the answers they're getting. And I think it does a great job of showing how this is about us as a church connecting, and we use this language, connect, communicate, collaborate. So just to cast a little vision for this, the church is not one congregation. The church is all believers, and I'm just going to use North America in this example, but the church across North America is one church. We are all one church. In the New Testament, just like you hear the church in Corinth or the church in Hierapolis or the church in Ephesus, right? It's the church, and letters were written to multiple churches, right? And you see people moving back and forth, sharing things, sharing resources, sharing money, taking collection to help a church that's another church that's struggling or in famine. This is the church. We are all part of this church. And I think it pleases the Lord for us to walk in unity as one. In John 17, Jesus prayed that all the followers, all his followers that would come about as a result of the ministry of the 11 would be one as he and the Father were one. That, I think, is our opportunity in embracing disciple making. It doesn't matter what our tradition is. It doesn't matter what our denomination is. We can partner together to accomplish that mission across North America and across the world. And that's really the vision. It's about making disciples and completing the mission that Jesus gave us.
Damian, that's great. Are there any places online where people can connect with you, social media, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I am on Instagram and Facebook as well. If you just enter my name, and I can send you those links to put in the show notes as well. I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me there. So that took us the easiest.
Yeah. All right. Hey, Damian, this has been so good. Thank you so much for giving up some time to come on the show. It's been an honor to talk to you. Thanks so much for being on today.
Man, Mark, it's a privilege. I appreciate you having me.